I want to get your perspective on Andrey Santos and have you maybe tell United fans who've not seen too much of him about what he's like. So what's the impression that he's made on you since he's joined Chelsea in the first place?
Yeah, unfortunately, the last season was not the season I think many of us hoped he was going to have, because a lot of the excitement about Santos is in some ways propelled and kind of elevated by what he did at Strasbourg. He was this really exciting, marauding box to box midfielder, a really good physical profile, someone who could be attackingly in the attack really influential. Clearly a good engine on him. I think the French to English game, there's always seems to be quite a good adaptation there, like quite seamless. I think that there are similarities between physically. Like I think you do see a tendency where if players succeed in France, it isn't so much of a culture shock when they move over to the Premier League. I think the biggest surprise for me watching him for Chelsea, when you also have to bundle in with kind of every player the madness of last season and how bleak things got, was he was used very differently to what I think I
Mm-hmm.
anticipated he was going to be used at Chelsea. His best performances for Chelsea last season were, and this stretches all the way back to the Club World Cup. I'd suggest if you're a United fan and you're looking into Santos, Enzo Maresca, in kind of a very late decision, decided to use Andrey Santos as effectively the sole defensive midfielder against Palmeiras in the quarterfinal. This is the game where Esteval scored against Chelsea before he joined. Um, and I think Reece James had got injured right before the game. So he had to make a quick decision. And Santos played a very mature, very disciplined, really noteworthy performance. Like I didn't anticipate he could have that in his game. And then as the season went on, he did that a couple more times. And you look at the Liverpool game right later on in the season, probably one of Chelsea's better performances after Christmas, one of their only good performances after Christmas at Anfield. Um, and again, him and Caicedo and Fernandes, they look to be a really decent, like on that day specifically, balance wise. You go to Anfield, whatever we say about Liverpool last season, it's still a tough away game. There was a bit more maturity to his game. And I think there was a hope that with Rafinha coming in, because of their previous connection, not only would Santos gain more minutes, which he hadn't in the first half of the season with Maresca, but that kind of coach player connection could kind of blossom and he could develop more for Chelsea. And then obviously everything just spiraled out of control. So I think that it's, Rafinha leaves, McFarlane comes in. So I think it was difficult for him. But I really like the profile of the player. I think he's physically durable. I think that's obviously quite an important thing of where I'm coming
Yeah.
from a Chelsea fan point of view. When I look at, say, Romero Lavia, who just can't stay fit for more than 2 weeks. So it's like a protection thing for me. Like if you're going to let a midfielder go, when you've got this midfielder who's shown no evidence that he can remain fit for more than 2 weeks a season, is not handy. Um, I think technically too, there's an ability to progress the ball. As I've said, there's a bit more versatility that you could play him defensively, and maybe he could be quite decent. But there also is that other side of his game that I just don't. I think is untapped actually. And I
Mm.
think if I'm a United fan, honestly, I wouldn't really be looking at his Chelsea season. I'd be looking at Strasbourg, and I'd be looking at what he became under Liam Rosenior in Ligue 1 when Strasbourg had that really good season, and how important a cog he was to the way that team moved, to the way he burst through and would accelerate up the pitch with the ball, without the ball, finishing chances that we just really haven't seen at Chelsea, which I think is a bit of a shame. And I think maybe a part of that is that Enzo Fernandez kind of takes that place at Chelsea. He's kind of the box crasher in chief, and it probably is an and obviously an adaptation of moving to Chelsea as well, that Santos has come in. But I really like the player, and I think there has been excitement about him from a very early age. And I'm always someone that's kind of a little bit restrained, because you see so many players move from South America and it takes them a long, long time. And I think that was the case with Santos, but I think there's a very good midfielder in there. So I think if I'm a Man United fan, yes, I want Chouameni. I've wanted Chouameni since he was at Monaco. He's not the big signing, I guarantee. Like he's obviously not. Like I understand with the Fernandez chase as well, and Tonali's been out and about, and Anderson too. It's not the mega move signing, but I think given what United could get from, as I say, untapped potential is what I'd say, with a bit of versatility mixed in there as well. And I think someone who physically is good enough for the Premier League.
Yeah, I think that was my take on it as well. I've not like watched him properly in depth at Chelsea, but I've always known what kind of profile that he was, and I think it's interesting that seeing that role that he did play in for Chelsea last season. But like, I think social media is never a great gauge to go and take as like gospel for everything. But the immediate reaction is to that. He's not good enough to get in Chelsea's team, really. Although he did play like a fair bit last year as well, didn't he? But if you've got two,
more so after Christmas.
yeah, if you've got two 100 million midfielders in there, then it's going to be quite difficult in order to like stamp your authority on that team, especially when you're like 20, 21.
Yeah, I'd also say that I think Chelsea have had a real midfield balance issue for a while, and
Yeah.
it could actually, it's the conversation that Chelsea fans are having right now, is that actually Enzo Fernandez, whether he leaves or not, I mean, I still think there's another chapter to go in the Real Madrid story this summer. I'm not entirely sure, even with that statement, it's officially over. There is, in some ways, looking at it, Fernandez going actually could free up Chelsea in midfield in a sense, because part of the problem that Chelsea have had is that Caicedo and Fernandez has never really been the midfield partnership that I think a lot of people anticipated it to be. So what's happened is that Fernandez, because he's a very, very good and effective attacking player, like he just is, like 15 goals last season, he's someone that gets on the end of chances. He's got a great instinct for, I'm not gonna relate him to the Chelsea's greatest ever player, but seeing a number 8 make a late run into the box, there is things about him that I just love, right? Like I think has made him he's really been transformed at Chelsea over since the end of 2024. But the problem is, you move him further and further forward, Caicedo sits deeper and deeper and deeper, and I guess you've kind of have that halfway house where if you're Santos coming in, you can't play the full box to box role. So maybe you're left in this kind of middle ground where you're not really able to do the full role that you want, because Chelsea have had that issue for a long time, and Chelsea have been overrun. And both Fernandez and Caicedo, like Caicedo's levels before Christmas were exceptional. Like I think there was like a year span pound for pound, I would put him against any central midfielder in world football in terms of his form. Like I genuinely looked at him and think, I don't think there's a better performing defensive or central midfield like in terms of what he was producing. And then he's really dipped. So I think with him, like with Santos, there's probably maybe an argument he should have gained more football. I think there was a frustration from some that in the latter weeks of the season under McFarlane, Lavia was getting on the pitch a bit more than Andrey Santos. And, there wasn't really much justification for that, because, Lavia's performances were not encouraging. And I would have given more minutes to Santos. So, yeah, it is true that Caicedo and Fernandez are established, and if you're not playing Caicedo, it's like with Man United dropping Bruno Fernandes. You can't just throw him into the bench and everyone's just going to shrug their shoulders and move on. That's going to become a headline, and if Michael Carrick does that at the start of next season, everyone's talking about it. If you drop Caicedo and Fernandes, it becomes a headline. Santos being on the bench for 6 months amongst Chelsea fans is maybe going to be a bit of a talking point, but it's not going to be brought up to your head coach. It's not going to make a fuss in terms of media speculation. So I think it's not as simple as he ain't good enough. I think it's a case of coming in, trying to establish yourself whilst Chelsea had an absolutely disastrous season, which I think you have to add some grace for. I think for a player who's just arrived at Chelsea as well, or just like officially come into the environment.
Yeah. The price quoted is about 50. For me, I'm like United to maybe go to 40 with add-ons. Like that would be kind of my approach to it. Yeah. You mentioned there that there's other players you prefer to see go first, but how does that price sound to you? Is that like in a market like this, is that fair value?
I think I feel a little bit similar. Funny enough, I think it was almost this time last year, I was going on an Arsenal podcast about Noni Madueke, and they were upset about the price. And the point I made is that the market influences everything else. So what happened last summer is that Anthony Elanga went quite early doors, I think for around 60 million, wasn't it, to Newcastle? And I think from there, the market was the market. And I looked at Madueke's numbers for Chelsea and I went, Chelsea should be asking for something similar, just based on the season. It doesn't matter. Unfortunately, it isn't always about the pure quality of a player and your judgment. We can all have subjective judgments about a player, right? Like I still can't believe that João Felix is going around for 45 million. I just don't understand it. But unfortunately, branding and also what else happens in the market. What's happened in the market this summer, a bit like in 2023, is that the midfield market has just exploded. It is absolute insanity, the fees going around for some of these players. I'm not saying Fernandes is a terrible player. I'm not saying Tonali is a crap player. Elliot Anderson is quite clearly a very good midfielder, but I mean, they're not worth any of the prices that have been,
I
if
know.
we're just
Yeah.
having a serious conversation.
Yeah.
So what happens then is that every other club is going to go, why am I going to let my midfielder go for cheap? Especially one that is a younger midfielder. I also think it's a compensation type thing, right? Chelsea, I think, would take a risk by letting Andrey Santos move to what I think should be a direct rival for Champions League football this season. You want to be compensated fairly for the potential of that player to get into their prime years at Man United and succeed. A bit like what we did when we sold Kai Havertz to Arsenal, right? I still think the 65 million we got for Kai Havertz was a good deal. We replaced him basically with Cole Palmer within the same summer for, was it about 20 million cheaper?
Yeah.
I think that's the mindset. Like, so Man United fans, I understand, would look at it and go, if they don't think that much of the player, if they haven't really seen that much of him, he's not a starter for Chelsea, 50 million. But I almost go, blame the rest of the market for that happening. If those moves had not have happened, it's why Chelsea are probably going to dig their heels in with Enzo Fernandez, and they're more than justified to do so with Real Madrid, because you're seriously telling me that Enzo Fernandez is not worth more than Elliot Anderson and Sandro Tonali and Matthias Fernandez. And again, it's a stupidity of the market, because Enzo Fernandez is not the same category and profile of midfielder as those midfielders. But we know in the past with Declan Rice, Caicedo, Fernandez, when both of those moved to Chelsea, he goes to Arsenal. Bellingham, I think, was in the same summer. Going to Real Madrid, it doesn't matter. Clubs will find an excuse to inflate the market and go, you're going to have to pay a bit more for this guy.
Yeah, I think if you get into prices of about 80 odd million, I'm very much like, this is a completely different kettle of fish. If it's 50 in the region, it's much of a muchness, really, in there. But I'm aware we haven't got too much time. But I did want to ask you about Garnacho before you shoot off.
Yeah.
Chelsea are open to selling him. United and Chelsea have done a bit of trading over the last few years. There's Mount, there's Garnacho, there's other players, I think, as well. Sancho. Oh, yeah, God. It's crazy to think this is pretty much the norm now. Maybe Santos is next, but Garnacho was last year. And I was quite on your pod. Like, I thought there was potential there. And I still have thought that there was potential there, but he's frustrating to watch, and he's got maybe the wrong people around and the wrong attitude towards the game as well. How has it gone for him? Just as much time as you got. How has it gone for him? And are you surprised to see that this is the way that Chelsea are going?
Yeah, I'm probably in a very small minority that I'm not throwing Garnacho out the door and kind of thinking that he's the worst player we've ever had. Unfortunately, Garnacho just has this weird vibe that follows him around. He seems to get booed everywhere. We're playing Lincoln away, and I don't understand why he's getting booed there as well. And people have this visceral dislike of Alejandro Garnacho that it does baffle me, because I look at Chelsea's squad in totality, and I'm someone that I take stock in output, and I take stock on what a player is tangibly doing on the pitch, and then, very fairly looking at other players. Have they been here longer? Are they older? Are they getting more minutes on the pitch? And I actually think up till Christmas, like, Garnacho's goals to minutes ratio was actually pretty decent, what he was producing. And then unfortunately, as the season tanked, his performances tanked as well. And I think that he is a lightning rod, really, for a lot of frustration. I think kind of every club has that kind of player, right? I think it was always a move last summer that was kind of, most people were against it. And unfortunately, I think what's happened is that from a perception point of view of Alejandro Garnacho at Chelsea, I think the unfortunate thing for him is that he's not in an environment where he's rotating with an established number one or a really elite number one where he can be a decent squad player. Like, it's not a Chelsea that has Eden Hazard as your established left winger, or even, like, I'd say, a Pedro or the best version of Willian. What you've got is no one's really established themselves on the left of Chelsea's attack. So there's no one really there for him to lean on. Like, I think he could be a very decent squad player in the right environment where he's got a bit of competition. The problem is at Chelsea, it's the blind leading the blind. Like, you got a load of raw, erratic, inconsistent young players fighting for minutes with a load of raw, erratic, inconsistent young players. And there's such a lack of mentality and leadership around the group that I think impacts a lot of players, and I actually think makes them look a lot worse than they actually are. I think that's the environment that Chelsea have created, unfortunately. So I think for his sake, there is a part of me that thinks unless Garnacho literally turns into a world beater and he's banging in 25 goals a season and almost every performance is flawless, I think unfortunately there's just a perception thing with Alejandro Garnacho now. I'm not saying all of it is like made up, but I think unfortunately, like you've probably experienced it with Man United, you've probably experienced it with Garnacho, right? That is it too far gone already? And he is not going to be in
Yeah.
the best environment to kind of make it work. And I wonder if a clean break from the Premier League is probably the best thing for him. Now, you know, Napoli have been cited where obviously Rasmus Højlund has gone and really enjoyed his time. Scott McTominay is really, it seems to be a great place for Man United, ex-Man United players to go and find new life. And even some Chelsea players have gone to Serie A and found, you know, a real good time of it. And I wonder out of the English media Premier League spotlight, maybe there's, you know, a chance for him to kind of refresh and reset, because I don't think he's been a disaster for Chelsea, but the unfortunate thing is he's now muddled in with a lot of failure. And like Paul Winstanley kind of apparently led the move last summer, and he is not a popular figure amongst Chelsea fans. Like he is persona non grata really in terms of, and for very good reason. So he blends into a lot of the mediocrity of transfers, and undeniably that's what Garnacho is to Chelsea. I think one Premier League goal, I think it was last season. I don't think he had a worse season than some of the other players in the squad attack wise, but listen, I think I'm probably one of the only Chelsea fans who thinks that Garnacho, I could still see something with Garnacho at Chelsea, but you have some realism about the situation that the mood, the environment, Chelsea need kind of a clean break in so many aspects. And I wonder if Garnacho, who might actually have a bit of a market as well, a bit like Santos, and could actually get you some money as well quite quickly, actually turns out to be all right. So that's kind of my feelings on him. You could have spoken to another Chelsea fan but listen, you know, Louis, right? My co-host on the Chelsea Echo. I mean, I don't think it's unfair to say he despises Alejandro Garnacho. Like there is a burn. It's like go back to wrestling. It's like the hatred between CM Punk and Seth Rollins. Like it's a lifelong rivalry. And I think that's not uncommon amongst Chelsea fans, unfortunately. So I think but that was set in stone even before he signed the contract, which I think makes it quite a unique situation. It's not something that's blossomed over the year. I think it's just kind of been people didn't like him, were never going to really warm to him. And then once the season spiraled, they were just like, yeah, that's the guy we really dislike.
Yeah, I think with United, obviously, I think the way he made his bed about going to get that move to Chelsea in the first place last summer, when there were other offers that they could have taken, when United had elevated him probably too early to go in and get in that like bona fide like starting slot on the left wing, I don't think that's really good for young players. But also, I do know what you're saying there. It's probably not the best environment for young players to succeed, and that's why I also think that maybe there is more to Andrey Santos than meets the eye for fans who don't watch Chelsea all the time.
Could I just quickly say, because it is a Man United podcast, there is a bit of me that looks at Marcus Rashford and ponders. I'm just saying, like, if he doesn't have a future at Man United, and Chelsea probably do need a left winger, there's a part of me that thinks, I mean, I'd be happy to sign Marcus Rashford.
Yeah.
But I wonder if it's another Jadon Sancho situation where he doesn't find a suitor before the end of. There's already been reports that he might even be prepared to sort of lower his wages to get out of Man United, at least for a season. And Rashford's one I look at and go, based on a profile player that Chelsea probably should be looking to target this summer. I mean, I have no inside information. This is just like looking at the market and trying to guess what could happen between now and the end. I mean, he may be fully integrated back into life at Man United and just plays, but he's one I'm looking at as kind of a potential option for Chelsea. At least if the possibility is there, I'd absolutely be trying to sign him this summer on loan.
Yeah, look, I haven't got a clue what's going to happen. I just don't know which. For me, I think he'd want to play in the Champions League, you know, and that's the thing. It doesn't seem to have been much of a big deal for Sandro Tonali going to, you know, Spurs from Newcastle, or Fernandes going to Spurs either. But we'll see how it goes. If that does happen, I'm sure I'd love to have you back on. But thanks so much, man. I really appreciate you joining. I think this is your first time on the pod, a little bit longer than we anticipated, but thanks very much. Really appreciate it. You can follow Daniel and his channel. All the links are in the description as well. Big thanks to you for popping on. Subscribe to this channel as well. All the links are in the description. Follow us on social as well. And we'll see you soon, everyone. See how the transfer window goes over the next few weeks and months, because United and Chelsea need to get busy. Until next time, Cheers.